Welcome to the Coaster101 podcast. I'm Eric Woolley again, joined this week as usual by Andrew Stillwell. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, everybody.
And our special guest this week for the first time ever on the podcast, Coaster101 founder, John Stevenson. Hi, John. How's it going?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. It's been my dream ever since this started to be here. So look at me now, Mom.
Yeah. Sorry we didn't invite you sooner.
You need better dreams.
This is...
Well, obviously, John, since this has been one of your dreams to be on the show, you're obviously very excited to answer a listener question in order to get to know the podcast a little bit better. This week's question comes from Dale on Twitter, and he can be found on Twitter at LittleDice504. Dale asks, if you could fix Six Flags as a company, what would you do? And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sugarcoat this question. So I'm going to say, what are some guest improvements that you could make throughout the chain? John, we'll start with you.
Yeah, food operations, hands down. Every time I go to a Six Flags park, that's usually what leaves me the most irritated, is wasting an hour just waiting in line, which, granted, I will not wait an hour for food, but I think just the poor food operations is definitely an area that I think would be relatively easy to improve. And I think that they are making that change. And I'll talk about this, my recent trip to Six Flags St. Louis, they are really starting to push that mobile ordering ahead so that you don't have to stand in line. And part of that is because of COVID, but then also I think it's just helping speed up that process. So I think they are moving in the right direction, but that's definitely, for me, I think the biggest frustration that I have encountered at multiple parks in previous years.
Eric, what about you?
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, John, because I hadn't been thinking of that, but I feel like it is at every Six Flags I've been to. I'm always shocked at how slow lines to get food are, which, like, it's not like the food is super complicated. I think most of it is probably coming out of a warming tray, but it's still like the lines move really slowly. And that does seem like something that is also an achievable improvement. So I will definitely second that. I think also, I think with Six Flags, we have to keep in mind that Six Flags is like, tickets to it tend to be cheaper than lots of other theme parks, and there's clearly like a more budget aspect to it. So building giant coasters or making operations go super fast, I don't think are very accurate. I think if there was one thing that I could improve, like not necessarily operationally in the parks, but and this is something I think the Cedar Fair parks have been doing a lot, maybe for the last like 5 to 10 years, they've been focusing on it a lot, is sort of improving some of the aesthetics at the parks. My biggest complaint with many roller coasters is the parking lot coaster style, which certainly the California Six Flags both feature at least one prominent parking lot roller coaster where like you can still see painted parking spots underneath them, and even ones where they've done a little bit of theming on like the entrance or some parts of it there are landscaped, but then still half the coaster goes over a parking lot. And I sort of feel like, would it really cost that much for them during their off season to just like replace this pavement with dirt and some bushes or something like that? I think it's something that would make the feeling of Six Flags parks, they'd feel a lot more finished, I think, if they could make a few little aesthetic improvements. What about you, Andrew? What's your big Six Flags fix?
I mean, you guys know me. I'm somewhat of a Six Flags skeptic. I would rather go to a Cedar Fair park. Obviously,
sure.
The two closest parks to me right now are Cedar Fair, which would be Carowinds and Kings Dominion. But, Six Flags to me, I kind of agree with you, Eric. The aesthetic and the parking lot coaster aspect. The thing that really gets me at Six Flags is everywhere you turn, there is an ad for something that is unrelated to the park. I mean, if you're in line at X Flight at Six Flags Great America outside of Chicago, you're going to see Takis ads. Or if, a couple years ago I was at Six Flags America outside of DC,
yep.
Roar, their wooden coaster, was like sponsored by Snickers. And if you're feeling angry, have a Snickers. If you're feeling angry, ride a roller coaster. It's a really, really forced partnership, I feel like.
Yeah.
And obviously, I'm talking about Snickers and Takis on a podcast years after I visited a Six Flags park. So the marketing's doing its job, but it's, to me, like, if I go to a theme park, I want to kind of be fully immersed in the experience, and I don't want to be forced to think about Takis or Twix bars or whatever, M&Ms, whatever random food stuff they're trying to promote through their corporate partners. So I think, if they could get away from that a little bit, and I realize that everybody's money's green, and maybe the Coaster101 podcast, now that we've got John on, we can talk about advertising in a Six Flags park, and maybe we can get our logo on like a Enterprise in the middle or something like that. So
that's definitely one of those. That's definitely one of those things where it's like, if you how much more per visit would you be willing to pay to have less advertising, right? Because obviously that's part of what helps keep their costs down. It's like,
Eric, you mentioned like your Six Flags like Platinum Pass, Diamond Elite, whatever their membership level is that you've got. You got it for like $4 during some sale, and so it's.
I think the biggest comparison between them and Cedar Point is like, so I have a regular Six Flags season pass that I think got a free upgrade to Gold, which includes parking and works at every Six Flags, and it cost $60, maybe less. Whereas the Cedar, to go to every Cedar Fair park, you need to get a Platinum Pass that costs $200, and like that's, as somebody who lives in a state that has multiple of each of those, so I'm almost always going to be going to multiple. It's like that's a pretty big price difference. Six Flags is definitely a much cheaper option, I think, for a lot of people who go to multiple parks, which is why sometimes it doesn't feel as nice.
That's a really good segue. I'm going to bring up one more thing, and then I'm going to jump back to the segue. I feel like the quality and kind of diversity of their food also needs to change.
Yeah.
Parks like Cedar Fair and then the Busch Gardens, SeaWorld parks, they put a lot into culinary the last couple of years. Six Flags is still very much the cheeseburger, chicken finger, pizza crowd, and it's not really changing. They had a Panda Express. It's now called Chopsticks. John is motioning at himself that he enjoys chopsticks. Oh, Johnny Rockets as well.
No, Johnny Rockets. Yeah, I'm cheeseburger and fries all the way.
I think John is motioning that he prefers to not have more interesting food at theme parks because all he wants are burgers and chicken strips.
That's absolutely correct.
I love it. Okay, John, you can have it. It's fine. I think they could step up their culinary game a little bit, and that's just me being a Cedar Fair snob that I am. But Eric, what you were saying, you have multiple parks in your home state of California that you have not been able to visit this summer, and I am in the same boat. Obviously, Carowinds, my home park, is not opened. But John, you've managed to visit some parks this summer. After the world got a little crazy with COVID, and you've managed to actually take some trips this summer.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Actually, the day before everything locked down, I was supposed to leave for a week in Orlando and all the Disney parks and Universal. It had been just about 10 years since I had last been, so that was a little devastating to lose that. The day before we were supposed to leave. So I had been saving up for that and the anticipation. So I was really, like all of us, struggling with the lack of roller coaster rides. So as soon as I saw that Dollywood was going to be opening, I went ahead and got my reservation and kicked off what's been a decent summer as far as coaster rides and park visits go. It's definitely been very different, vastly different from previous years, and lots of changes, and far from what I have experienced in previous years. But I think for the most part, the parks have done a pretty good job of adapting and doing everything that they can to keep everyone safe and healthy.
So, John, can you recap which parks you've been to so far this summer?
Yeah, so in June 15th, Coaster101's 15th birthday this year, I went to Dollywood for their first day. They had two season pass holder preview days. And then in July, I went to Kings Island, wanted to ride Orion. It had been about 8 years since I'd been there. Followed that up with a stop at Kentucky Kingdom on my way back. And then last Friday, I went to Six Flags St. Louis, which I had not been to in about 5 years. So have been to a good mix of parks. Like I said, they've all, some have done things very well, some not so much. They've all had their strengths and weaknesses, and it's been interesting to see how much they, the similarities between the protocols and procedures, but then also the differences as well. So it's been very interesting just going and in such a relatively short time span, and seeing how each of them are operating in these very uncertain times.
Yeah, you've hit the almost the corporate park bingo here. You've got a Cedar Fair park at Kings Island. You've got a Six Flags park, St. Louis. You've got a Hershey park, but kind of an independent park in Dollywood. Hershey's not the biggest chain out there. And then you've got Kentucky Kingdom, who's kind of doing their own thing. Obviously, you talked a little bit about the safety protocols and procedures, and I feel like that's just the hot button topic with any park. We've certainly written our fair share of regurgitated press releases about stickers on the ground and hand sanitizer in the stations. But how were the procedures different at all of those parks? How did they differ? How were they the same?
Yeah, so the differences really started when you go to make a reservation, because a lot of the parks, originally at least, were requiring reservations to enter. And so Dollywood, when they announced on that they were reopening for season pass holders, I went right for my computer and made the reservation. I was already a season pass holder. So no issues there getting a reservation. Kings Island, I had decided that I was going to go about 2 weeks prior, and I bought my ticket, made a reservation, or bought my season pass and made a reservation. And parks have generally been making reservations starting about 30 minutes before the park opens, and you can they're usually in like 30-minute increments. And so I, at both the Dollywood and Kings Island, reserved the earliest available. So getting there at Dollywood, I was there for a media preview just of how they were handling everything, the different operational changes. They had hundreds of operational changes, both, that guests would see and behind the scenes. And so we walked through and talked through some of those, looked at the Flower and Food Festival sculptures and the food. So that was a little bit different because we went in the side entrance. We still went through the safety check, which involved a forehead temperature scan, a questionnaire, if you were experiencing any symptoms or had any known exposure. Pretty standard with what you would, ask at any type of business that you were trying to get into that had that screening in place. Right. Kings Island was similar. They a little bit more. They had these long tents, covered tents set up that you walk through, and they put you against a wall for the temperature scan. So it was a little bit more intense, but again, was going through the main entrance. But with Kings Island, you actually had to complete a health screening questionnaire before you went to the park. You could complete it on the app up to 24 hours before you got to the park. And so that was basically the same thing, same questions.
Do you then just show, does it pop up something, do you show something on the app to like an employee and they say, okay, yeah, you filled it out and checked it off?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they scanned something. Yeah. So obviously both of those, you're self-reporting any symptoms you may or may not have. So you're trusting that the guest is going to be truthful in their responses. So moving on to Kentucky Kingdom, they did not require reservations. They did the temperature scan, same, I think of all the 4 parks that I've been to, they were definitely the most casual about it. I don't recall if I think they asked if I had had any symptoms, but it was very, just a little bit less official, you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
And then Six Flags St. Louis on Friday, they require reservations.
Okay.
I should say Dollywood no longer requires reservations. I think they realized that the park was Dollywood, if you've been, is a huge park. And I think they realized pretty quickly that they were not at risk of reaching that capacity, and they would not disclose what that capacity was. But even on a busy day, unless you're there during Christmas or their harvest festival, it's not going to be, it's very, very easy to maintain social distance there.
Yeah.
So I think they realized that just wasn't an issue. I don't know if that's going to continue into harvest festival season and their Smoky Mountain Christmas season. We'll see. But Six Flags St. Louis still required reservations, so I made reservation for the earliest time slot. They actually had a really cool system for temperature scanning. They have a kind of a setup right outside the entrance with mask for sale, and that was the first time I had seen that of all the four, where you could buy mask at the entrance. So they had some just basic mask for $1, and then they had their premium mask, which had Justice League and other characters on them that you could buy for like $5 or $6. So, but then you walk through this tent, and they actually have this technology that I've seen used in some other high traffic areas where it's kind of a radar gun.
It's like the infrared scanner that basically you walk through, and Right. So I went to the one half theme park I've been to is the Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. It's sort of like they've got their animal exhibits open, and it sounds almost exactly the same. So that they must be implemented all of that technology, and like the mask sales all must have been universally done across all of the Six Flags.
I kind of felt like a bag at TSA watching a guy watch me go through.
Did they make you fill out a questionnaire? Because when I went to Discovery Kingdom, we had to fill one out, and they scanned similar. It was like on the app, they scanned it.
No.
Oh, interesting.
No, they just did the question, kind of the verbal questionnaire, I believe. But no, there was no pre-check like there was with Kings Island or filling out any.
So you sort of talked about this a little bit with how Dollywood is now no longer doing reservations because it didn't seem like they were filling up their capacity. But I'm curious, how did the crowds feel, both since you went to like Dollywood right away at the beginning and you went to Six Flags St. Louis now in late August? Did it feel like crowd levels were abnormally low at all of these parks, or did it feel like they were? I mean, I assume the reservations weren't selling out. That's obviously in Dollywood's case why they stopped doing them. But I'm curious, did it feel like the parks were more emptier than usual? And did it feel any different at the beginning versus now?
Yeah, definitely. Dollywood, I mean, it was noticeably, I would say it was like a kind of an off-season day.
Yeah.
There was one point where I did get a little overwhelmed. And I was just at the right point in Craftsman's Valley, which is the path, the midway. The path is a little bit more narrow. It's one of the older sections of the park. And I was passing through, if you're familiar with the park, right, kind of where the gristmill is, where you can buy the cinnamon bread. There's got these rocking chairs out, like rows of rocking chairs, which are now socially distanced, which was kind of sad because it's a place that you go and you can just literally sit on a rocking chair and, next to friends or family, and then watch the crowds. Do some great people watching. But so I was there right as a show, and most of the shows are, not happening. They're not showing at the indoor theaters, but they have moved some of them outside, and they have some open air theaters that they do the live music at. And so there was a moment where one of those shows was letting out, and they've got the benches or pews, pew-like benches spaced out, but there was just kind of this mass exodus. And so at that point, I just got a little anxious because this was the first time that I'd really been in any type of crowd since March. I've tried to be a good quarantiner. And so I was a little overwhelmed at that point, especially when I saw this guy several feet away from me lower his face mask to cough. I need to get out of here right now. So that was really one of the few times. What I've tried to do, and I am a recovering germaphobe. So a lot of the things that I've done at parks this year, I've been doing um, my entire life. And so I try to, with each of these, get to the park early before the crowds do. And so um, Kings Island, same. I didn't. It was noticeably more crowded at Kings Island um, than Dollywood in places. But definitely, when you're like around Orion, everyone in the park is going to be going to
Yeah.
that area. I mean, that's just like a magnet, which is understandable. And so it was a little bit more crowded, but um, I think in just a theme park in general, it's if there's one place that I would like to be in a crowd, so to speak, it's at a place like that, because unless you're stuck in line, which is a different story, and if you're just there visiting, not walking around the midways, it's fairly easy to maintain a reasonable amount of distance. This
Yeah.
isn't Disney World during peak season, so I think as long as you're cognizant of your surroundings and get to the park early and just try to do the same things that you would do during the season, as far as if it's a park you're familiar with, mapping your strategy so that you go to the less crowded areas of the park first. To me, because I kind of did that, I never was in a place where I was very overwhelmed. But there were certainly, I know, I remember at Kentucky Kingdom, I was in line for Thunder Run, and I could see into the water park, and the wave pool area was very crowded. It was very unsettling. It was just, I mean, water parks pre-COVID stressed me out a little bit, and
Already
so
kind of gross. Yeah.
yeah, so I am very much a pro theme park. I am not one to really claw into a water park. So there were definitely points, where I saw from afar, like, okay, I'm not going to go in that direction just because it is a little bit more crowded. But for the most part, yes. I mean, you could look at the parking lots of Kings Island and Six Flags St. Louis, the latter of which I'm been to many, many times, so I can kind of gauge the parking lot. And you go to it, and it's a little sad, honestly, because and it's hard to say. It's like, is it the capacity, or is the number of cars there low because of the reservations, or is it there because people just don't feel safe going to amusement parks
Yeah.
and theme parks this summer? And so that's kind of regardless of the reason or the cause, that yes, they are noticeably less crowded, especially for the summer.
Now that we've gotten all the COVID stuff out of the way, and I feel like you can't listen to a podcast today without somebody talking
Oh
about
no.
COVID. No offense, John. I mean, it was very interesting. Let's talk rides. This is
Yes,
this is
please.
why people are going to tune into this podcast. You mentioned that this was your first visit to Kings Island in about 8-10 years, whatever it was. So they've
Mhm.
added some new coasters in that time frame. What were your thoughts on the new to you rides like Banshee, Mystic Timbers, and obviously Orion?
Yeah, so I'll start with Banshee. Amazing. It was the newest B&M invert that I have ridden. I think the only one built after 2010. And so, I mean, the size of it, the layout, the pacing, I mean, the second half really is so disorienting. I mean, it just one thing right after the other. It's relentless. There was no reprieve at all. I love the inline twist. I am very very pro inline twist. I think I think we just need more inline twist in the world, um, and very different from a zero G roll. It was there was a little bit of rattle, which I was surprised by for such a relatively new B&M, and it definitely did not detract from the ride. It was just a little noticeable, and I don't know if that was because of the trains. They've got the new wider trains. They kind of have the same restraints as B&M's wing coasters, but I mean, just it's got to be one of the most picturesque coasters at that park. I mean, the color, just the way that the loop wraps around the lift hill. I mean, it's just that beautiful entrance sign. It's a very photogenic coaster. So very much enjoyed that. Mystic Timbers was, I mean, it just blew me away. I think I love GCI. I'm a huge GCI fan. But that coaster, it does things that at least the GCIs that I've been on have not done. They're twisted rides, they're just in general, but this one, it was just wild. It was like they just put a traditional GCI um, into a blender and just cranked it up. I mean, there were so many transitions, and it was low to the ground, and it went back into the woods, and I mean, it was just it was amazing. It really is one of those rides I was kind of left speechless. And I don't know if I was just expecting a traditional GCI. Like I love Thunderhead. I love American Thunder at Six Flags St. Louis. It was just so radically different from the GCIs that I'm used to. So it was an amazing ride. I was a little underwhelmed by the shed at the end. I think I won't go into that. I think there were some possibly more thrilling things that could have been done with that. I wish the ride had started with that, but the theming was incredible for Cedar Fair. Andrew, like you've kind of alluded to, I think they've done a really great job of making their rides more immersive, and really that attention to detail. It was really, really nice and well done. And then, yeah, Orion is just amazing. I'm always a little, I guess, concerned when a park has both a B&M Hyper and a B&M Giga Coaster, because they do, could in theory do pretty much the same thing. But I think Orion was so vastly different than Diamondback, which of course is their B&M Hyper, in its elements, obviously in its height, the speed. It was such a thrilling ride, and the view from the top, and I mean, this it makes such an impact on their skyline, and the Orion's Belt element, which is kind of a incline helix, so to speak, was really, really intense. I definitely grayed out, I think, every time I rode it. So of course it's too short. I could have, it has a lot of energy as it enters the 200 foot tall brake run, but it doesn't, kind of fizzle out. It definitely maintains its momentum all the way to the end. Love the theming. I think they, again, did a really good job with the queue, and your article, Andrew, about all the Easter eggs. It was fun trying to follow that and see how many I could find. And yeah, it's just a great addition to that park's lineup. But actually, I'd been twice in my life, and so through those trips, I'd missed a few of the other coasters at the park, and one of those was Adventure Express, their Aero Mine Train, which really kind of caught me off guard. It's a really, really cool ride that does a great job of kind of using the terrain, the Kings Island kind of hilly terrain, to its advantage, and has also some interesting theming in the lift hill at the end with the kind of a mine temple and animatronics. Yeah.
As Andrew is miming that right now. That's
yes.
probably one of the most underrated roller coasters, because I think, like, until just now, I had forgotten it existed at Kings Island, but it is, like, my memories of it are all very positive.
Yeah, it's tucked away. It's very unassuming. You can't really see much of it from the midway. But yeah, it was definitely one of the highlights of the trip, and I hate that I'd waited this long to ride it. So definitely can't miss it. Vertigo as well was new to me. I mean, I kind of knew what I was in for with that one, but had to get the credit, and it is what it is, and not going to be running back to it, but I'm glad that I rode it. So it's a really good day. I got to spend 2 days there. I met up with Kyle, who has been there much more than I have. So it was good. I got all the credits there except for the pumpkin coaster that I'm too tall to ride and don't have a child to ride with me. So maybe someday.
Did any of the other parks that you went to have new rides open this year? Or I guess, I mean, none of them had new coasters, obviously, but
No, nope. This was the only one.
got it. So that was where you could check most of your boxes for
Yeah.
new fun. Did the parks feel like, so obviously there was an abbreviated off season. Lots of parks had to shut down for at least a little bit. But like lots of parks do lots of sort of not just building new coasters work in the off season. They'd repaint things and they plant and re-landscape stuff like that and change restaurants. The parks feel like they'd had a normal off season and were like looking good and looking like they'd gone through their full normal off season maintenance. I mean, I know Dollywood obviously was doing lots with their landscaping and stuff like that.
Yeah, Dollywood actually opened one day in March for their season pass holder preview day, and if only I'd known, Kyle was actually there that day, I would have gone.
Yeah.
So that was actually the start of their season. So they had done, I mean, they have a very, very short off season, basically from the first weekend in January when the park closes to mid-March. And so they, as far as off season maintenance and upkeep and things like that, they were, ready to go. And they have a Festival of Nations, which kicks off their season. And so they had, I'm sure, were all set up for that and had the international cuisine and international acts come in, and they were probably all ready to go. And so that was, of course, canceled. And then their Flower and Food Festival that's new this year, that was supposed to start in the spring right after Festival of Nations ended. And it, of course, did not get started until mid-June. So, but everything was immaculate. I mean, you never would have known that the park had, that the event had been delayed. The other parks, I think by the time that I got to them, well, maybe not. Kings Island and Kentucky Kingdom had only been open for a few weeks. Because it had been, even Kentucky Kingdom, I hadn't been there in 4 years. So there was nothing that I could see that looked like they had scrambled. I mean, Dollywood especially, I was very impressed by. They only had a few weeks from, obviously they had been working on getting everything ready to go, but as far as once they got the go-ahead from the governor to reopen, when attractions could reopen like that, I mean, they did the amount of work that it must have taken to, plan these 700 operational changes and what all goes into that. I mean, I'm sure they have some of this disaster planning in the works, especially with Dollywood, with the wildfires that the area had a few years ago. But I mean, this is it's cliche at this point, but it's so unprecedented. And so, I mean, I've been really impressed with all the parks that they have had to pivot and change course so quickly. There are definitely some noticeable differences. Some attractions are closed. All the food operations are not open. Live entertainment is very reduced. But as far as the parks, how they look and feel, if I didn't know that there was, we were in the midst of all this, I don't think I would be able to notice anything. The social distancing decals all over the ground are definitely the most the constant reminders of the state of the world we're in right now.
Gotcha. John, I got one last question for you, and we're going to talk about the most 2020 photo that has ever been taken. Was the photo you took of Lightning Run at Kentucky Kingdom as a train is cresting an airtime hill. There is a train full of people, and just on the outside of the train, there is a mask that is inevitably flown off of somebody's face because either they were not wearing it properly, the most likely candidate here, or
they were holding it in their hand.
They were holding it in their hand, or the forces associated with Lightning Run just ripped the mask right off their face. I want to know what your reaction was when you realized you had that picture as perfectly timed as you did. And we're going to post it on all the social channels, repost it next week so everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, it was definitely, I was obviously surprised and almost didn't catch it at first. It's like, oh, that's a bird or something. But I was surprised, but at the same time, if you've ever ridden Lightning Run, you know the type of borderline violent ejector air on that coaster, and I very much believe that the world should have many, many more of those chance um, mini steel, just insanity airtime machines. And so it surprised me, but it also didn't. I will say, um, so Dollywood did not require mask on the rides, at least when I went. It was kind of a little inconsistent. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. But I, of course, started my day with the ride on Lightning Rod. And my mask, I was very, very concerned that it would not make it back. And so after that first ride, I started holding it in my hand because I would see some people put it in the ride bins, the loose article bins, which
Yep.
that's disgusting. Do not do that. People, please. Just throwing it in there, who knows what you're throwing it on or throwing it in. Like there's almost always liquid something at the bottom of those. So would not recommend that. But yeah, I mean, it's Lightning Rod obviously is another very intense roller coaster. And so I don't know if it would have fallen off or if it was just, the feeling that it was going to. But then actually at Six Flags St. Louis, I was on, I believe it was Beast, and I was sitting behind someone who lost their mask and my face caught it.
You mean the boss, right?
The boss, yes, thank you. I will forever call the boss the Beast and the Beast the boss. So a boss is obviously another quite intense ride, and so it. Thankfully, I was wearing my face mask. Face masks are required on all rides there, most of them, and so it was. I was very glad that I was wearing my face mask, and that is why, for the most part, I have tried to sit towards the front of the train this year.
This has been a PSA from Coaster101.com. Please wear your mask and continue to do so.
Yeah.
John, you have any more trips planned this year?
So tentatively, we're going to make another shot at Disney in Orlando in October. Things can change so quickly in the course of a month. So we had our tickets for March and still have the tickets. So I've rebooked the hotel. We've got the plane, the flights, and so we're kind of just. This is a family trip that had been in the works for well over a year, and so we're kind of with the mindset is like, well, we've already lost it once. What's one more time? So we'll see about that. Hoping to go to Dollywood in the next few weeks. Would like to get down to Six Flags over Georgia, and then back to Dollywood in time for Christmas. I think it's very much we'll just play it by ear and see how things are. Definitely only going to parks that are very, and I will say most of the parks have, I think the guests have done a fairly good job of wearing their mask from the ones that I've seen, and then the parks have done a fairly good job of enforcing it. And so you definitely have some gaps in there. But I definitely would only go to a park that had a required mask policy. It's not that inconvenient, especially once the temperatures start going down a bit, and it's a very minor inconvenience to have trips to theme parks this year. And so I applaud the parks for those, especially even if they aren't required to, the parks that have those policies. And I think it's we'll just wait and see how the virus plays out, how it's trending, and but I'm trying to make the most of this year and doing it as safely as possible. So I think there's I actually wrote a piece for the site about some of the tips that you can take, and these are coming from a germaphobe who has been doing a lot of these even before the pandemic. So I think if you're smart and do some planning and as I said, just be cognizant of your surroundings. I think just with some common sense, it is possible to have a safe visit to a theme park in this pandemic.
That is some sound advice. And if you're listening, be sure to check out that article on Coaster101.com. That does it for this week's show. Thanks to John for finally joining us this week. And John, we will gladly take you back anytime. just until you fire me or Eric for saying something bad about Dollywood or Pepsi at Kentucky Kingdom or whatever.
Yeah, Dollywood's off limits. Everything else is fair game. It's my home park, so got to look after Dolly.
John's got some articles coming to the site, which is Coaster101.com. Hopefully, if you're listening to this podcast, you've realized that by now. We're on all forms of social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, TikTok, even some of the other ones that nobody knows what they are, at Coaster101. If you got questions, comments, concerns, or want to mock Eric and I for not visiting any parks this year, you can send us an email at podcast@coaster101.com. Thanks to Justin Mabry and Jay and Music Design for our theme music, and a quick congratulations to them on their new venture, Knack and Grind, this week. Check that out at knackandgrind.com. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Bye.
See ya.